Welcome back to the Too Dumb to Quit podcast with Jeremy McComb. Very talented, god-awful ugly.
Friends, neighbors, welcome back to the Too Dumb to Quit podcast. Your old pal, Jeremy McComb. I'm actually currently in a small apartment in Phillipsburg, Montana, small town in the middle of Montana, a little mining town. Getting ready to play a show tonight. Been traveling through the central Idaho, eastern Idaho mountains through Chalice and Stanley, and so it's been a little difficult to stop. I don't have the bus out. I'm just doing fly dates and rental cars and running around and really getting a chance to kind of dive into a lot of the stuff that we talk about a lot here on the podcast. And so I'd started writing this podcast on this trip here about what fuels our confidence. And this morning, while I always kind of try to set aside some time to read and get a little more connected with the principles that I try to preach about all the time, and the practicing of it, which is what, we talk about all the time of continuing to better ourselves. It's just practicing failing. I read a chapter in Ego is the Enemy, which, is something that I keep with me all the time. And I want to put it on the podcast today. It was written by Ryan Holiday, but I want to start with the original idea for this podcast today, which is what fuels your confidence. And confidence, narcissism, egotistics, being egotistical, these are all things that kind of fall into the same category for most people. Arrogance, greed, they fall in line along with the need for power and the need to be recognized. And this is all going to kind of tie in at the end, so stay with me here. But it all comes down to the need to be validated for how good you are or what you've accomplished. But honestly, I got to thinking about, what have we accomplished? And it's important for each of us to take a step back and detach ourselves from our reality to really examine where our confidence stems and thrives from. To really find a way to live in a true reality where we see our shortcomings and our flaws and our failures, because our mind and our generational upbringing of you can accomplish anything you put your mind to, or you can be anything you want to be if you really try hard enough, isn't based in reality. It sounds nice, but I would love to be a pro football player or a pro hockey player. The fact is I'm not, because I'm not an athlete. It's not because I hurt my knee in 8th grade or because I had a shitty coach in the high school system. The fact is I don't have the skill set. I don't have the mindset. I don't have the physical attributes to be an NFL player. And I failed a lot when I was trying to find exactly what it was. Am I an athlete? Am I a jock? I tried to skateboard. I was shitty at that. And this is where we start to hear the word talent come in. And I know that we all know those guys who said, I would have been a pro football player had I not done this, or had this coach not held me back on my senior year of high school, I would have gotten a full ride. We hear these excuses all the time. And then the word talent starts to come in. And the only way that I can really get my point across from my point of view is looking at it from Nashville. And, Music City, literally over 100 people per day moving to town to pursue their dream of being in the music business, being a country star, being a hit songwriter. And they've been told by everyone in their hometown that they're the baddest motherfucker on the planet with a Fender Telecaster. They're the best guitar player in their town. So they pack up and they move to town. And Billy Badass on a guitar from Ohio moves to Nashville, only to find out that there is 1 million Billy Badasses from all over the world in Nashville chasing the same dream, which is currently held by about 40 people on the radio. That's the top 1% of our business. And, there's a joke in town actually about that exact scenario of how people become bass players in Nashville. Is you move to town, you're a great guitar player, but there's a bass player job open and you can't get any work. So you start playing bass. And the moral is that talent really doesn't mean shit. It's just the starting point for where the work begins. The things a lot of people view as the goal are really just the beginning of the real work. Getting a record deal, starting a business, getting that big break promotion, whatever it is, that's just the beginning of when the real work needs to start. Talent means shit. It means nothing other than a compass for each of us to guide ourselves by. Like, wow, I really enjoy this. And it seems I have kind of a natural knack for this. I have an ability to do this. And this is where the beginning of where the real work needs to start. And, that's always been, when you look at these game talent reality shows that are awarding some young hopeful a record deal or something along those lines. And again, I stay in the music business because it's just a perspective that I know better than others. But when you look at these reality shows like The Voice or American Idol, things like that, for every Miranda Lambert, Kelly Clarkson, Carrie Underwood, you've got 3 of those really. And for every one of them, there's 35 other seasons of people you can't name. And the worst of it is it seems like a shortcut. But what it really is 99% of the time is that it's a flash in the pan. You get 15 minutes on TV. You're on that season. You're popular. You grow with your TikTok crowd. You get to do all these things. You go out. The problem is with that, when it's over, it's all been built on artifice. The work hasn't been done. If you haven't learned how to tour, if you haven't learned how to work a crowd, write songs, record, do it all on your own, what happens when you're no longer on the show? There's no team. There's no past experience to understand the business that you're in. And it just becomes, I was on season 87 of The Voice on Blake's team, which means absolutely nothing because you can't sell tickets. You don't have songs. It's all achievements being held up by bullshit. It's not real. And it really comes down to, it's like ego. Winston Churchill put it, facts are better than dreams. And if we can step back and detach ourselves and from our work to see where it is failing or where it's not good, and taking a brutal, honest look at ourselves, it allows us to grow and to learn and to get better and to be more prepared for the next obstacle and to have the experience to be able to see that next stumbling block as an opportunity. We have to learn that while we can think big, we have to focus on small steps, living and acting in reality, putting one foot in front of the other to be action and education-based and focused. We have to forego the validation, the rewards, the esteem that comes with victories, and we have to focus on the war. But right now, we're entrapped in this culture that is held up entirely by bullshit and ego, where validation is king. The things that matter the most are TikTok followers and Instagram followers and all these things. And that's where this podcast was starting. And this is where I was headed on this one. And I read this morning in a book that I read daily. It's a handbook for life for me. It's never more than about 5 feet from me. A book called Ego's the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. And there's a chapter in here that really falls in line with the podcast today. And so I wanted to read it on here. It's a chapter in Ego is the Enemy written by Ryan Holiday called Don't Tell Yourself a Story. And starting in 1979, football coach and general manager Bill Walsh took the 49ers from being the worst team in football and perhaps professional sports to a Super Bowl victory in 3 years. And it would have been tempting as he hoisted the Lombardi trophy over his head to tell himself that the quickest turnaround in NFL history had been his plan all along. It would have been tempting decades later when he assembled his memoirs to assume the same narrative. It's a sexy story that his takeover, his turnaround, the transformation were all scheduled. That it happened exactly as he wanted because he was just that good and that talented. And no one probably would have faulted him had he said that. Yet he refused to indulge in those fantasies. When people asked Walsh whether he had a timetable for winning the Super Bowl, his answer was no. Because when you take over a team that bad, ambitions like that would be totally and utterly delusional. The year before he arrived, the 49ers were 2-14. If you're not a sports person, that means they had won 2 games and lost 14 games. The organization was demoralized, broken, didn't have draft picks, and fully ensconced in a culture of losing. His first season, they lost 14 straight games. Nearly resigned midway through his second year because he wasn't sure that he could do it. And 24 months from taking over, a little over a year and a half later, after almost quitting, he was there a Super Bowl genius. And how did it happen? How was that not part of the plan? The answer is that when Bill Walsh took control, he wasn't focused on winning per se. Instead, he implemented what he called a standard of performance. And by that, he meant what should be done, when and how, at the most basic levels and throughout the organization. Walsh only had one timetable, and it was about instilling these standards. He focused on seemingly trivial details. Players couldn't sit down on the practice field. Coaches had to wear a tie and tuck their shirts in. Everyone had to give maximum effort and commitment. Sportsmanship was essential. The locker room had to be clean and neat. There would be no smoking, no fighting, no profanity. Quarterbacks were told when and where and how to hold the ball. Linemen were drilled on 30 separate critical drills. Passing routes were monitored and graded down to the inch, and practices were scheduled to the minute. It would be a mistake to say that this was all about control. The standard of performance was about instilling excellence. And these seemingly simple but exacting standards mattered more than some grand vision or some power trip. In his eyes, if the players would take care of the details, the score would take care of itself. The winning would happen. Walsh was strong and confident enough to know that these standards would eventually contribute to victory. He was also humble enough to know that when victory would happen, it was not something he could predict. And it happened, faster than any other coach in history. And that was a fortuitous break of the game. It wasn't because of his grand vision. In fact, in his second season, a coach complained to the owner that Walsh was too caught up in the minute details and had no goals to win, to which Walsh then fired that coach for essentially tattling. We want so desperately to believe that those who have great empires set out to build one. Why? So we can indulge in the pleasurable planning of ours. So we can take full credit for the good that happens and the riches and respect that come our way. And narrative is when you look back at an improbable or unlikely path to your success and say, I knew it all along. Or instead of, I hoped, I worked, I got some good breaks, or even I thought it could happen, but you never really know. And if you did know, it was more faith than knowledge. But who wants to remember all the times that we doubt ourselves? Crafting stories out of past events is a very human impulse. It's also very dangerous and untrue. Writing our own narrative leads to arrogance. It turns our life into a story, and it turns us into characters while we still have to live it. The author Tobias Wolff writes in a novel, Old School, these explanations and stories get cobbled together later, more or less sincerely. And after the stories have been repeated, they put on the badge of memory and block all the other routes of exploration. And Bill Walsh, again, understood that it was really about the standard of performance, the deceptively small things that were responsible for the team's transformation and victory. But that's too boring for newspaper headlines, and that's why he ignored it when they called him a genius. If he would have accepted the title and went along with the story, it wouldn't be just a harmless personal gratification. These narratives don't change the past, but they do have the power to negatively impact our future. His players shortly proved the risks inherent in letting a story go to their heads. Like most of us, they wanted to believe that their unlikely victory occurred because they were special. In 2 seasons after the Super Bowl, the team failed miserably, partly due to the dangerous confidence that accompanies these kinds of victories, losing 12 of 22 games. That's what happens when you prematurely credit yourself with powers that you don't have control of. This is what happens when you start to think about your rapid achievements and what they say about you, and you begin to slacken the efforts and standards that initially fueled your successes. Only when the team returned wholeheartedly to the standard of performance did they start winning again. They won 3 Super Bowls and 9 conference or division championships in a decade. Only when they stopped with the stories and focused on the task at hand did they begin to win like they had before. And here's the other part. Once you win, everyone is gunning for you. It's during your moment at the top that you can afford ego the least because the stakes are so much higher. The margins for error are so much smaller. If anything, your ability to listen and to hear feedback, to improve and to grow matter more now than ever before. Facts are better than stories and image. There was a 20th century financier, Bernard Baruch, who had a line, don't try to buy at the bottom and sell at the top. This can't be done except by liars. That is, people's claims about what they're doing in the market are rarely to be trusted. And when we are aspiring, we must resist the impulse to reverse engineer success from other people's stories. When we achieve our own, we must resist the desire to pretend that everything unfolded exactly as we'd planned. There's no grand narrative, and you should remember you were there when it happened. A few years ago, one of the founders of Google gave a talk in which he said the way that he judges prospective companies and entrepreneurs is by asking them if they're going to change the world, which is fine, except that's not how Google started. It's not how YouTube started. It's not how true wealth was created. Paul Graham, an early investor in Airbnb, Reddit, Dropbox, and a bunch of other stuff, was working in the same city as Walsh a few decades later in San Francisco, explicitly warned startup against having big, bold, sweeping visions early on. But he explains the way to do really big things seems to be to start with deceptively small things. He's saying you don't have to make a frontal attack out of ego. Instead, you start with a small bet and scale your ambitions as you go. His famous other piece of advice was keep your identity small. And it fits well here, making it about the work and the principles behind it and not about the glorious vision that makes a great headline. Napoleon had the words "to destiny" engraved on a wedding ring that he had given his wife. Destiny was what he always believed in. It's how he justified the boldest, most ambitious ideas, and it was also why he overreached time and time again until his real destiny was divorce, exile, defeat, and infamy. A great destiny, Seneca reminds us, the Stoic philosopher, is great slavery. There's a real danger in believing it when people use the word genius, and it's even more dangerous when we let hubris tell ourselves that we are one. The same goes for any label that comes along with a career. We are suddenly a filmmaker or a writer or an investor or an inventor or an entrepreneur or an executive because we've accomplished one thing. One thing we've accomplished. These labels put you at odds, not just with reality, but with the real strategy that made you successful in the first place. From that place, we might think that success in the future is just a natural next part of the story, but it has to be rooted in work, creativity, persistence, and of course, luck. Google's alienation from its own roots caused a lot of stumbles. Google Glass, Google Plus might be evidence of it already going that direction. And they're not alone. Too often, artists who think it was inspiration or pain that fueled their art and create an image around that instead of hard work and sincere hustle eventually find themselves at the bottom of a bottle or on the wrong end of a needle. And the same goes for us. In whatever we do, instead of pretending that we are living some great story, we must remain focused on the execution and on executing with excellence. We have to shun the false crown and continue working on what got us here, because that's the only thing that will keep us here. That's from the chapter, Don't Tell Yourself a Story. Ego is the Enemy. Check it out, Ryan Holiday. Hopefully some inspiring words, and hopefully it hits you like it hit me this morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in on the old Too Dumb to Quit podcast. I'll have another one coming at you on Tuesday. This is a bonus one for the weekend. It's Sunday right now from a small apartment in the middle of Montana. I hope you're having a great day and looking forward to talking to y'all on Tuesday. Small changes in your brain, big changes in your life. Friends and neighbors, go out there and get it done.